At 10:50 p.m. on May 26, 1941, a 1,700-ton Polish destroyer spotted the most powerful battleship in the world through the darkness of a North Atlantic gale. Bismarck, a warship that outweighed her 30-1. Bismarck's 15-inch guns had already wrecked the mighty HMS Hood. A single direct hit would certainly obliterate the tiny Piorun. Commander Eugeniusz Pławski could shatter the enemy and wait for reinforcements. That was the smart choice, the safe choice. But his crew begged him for the alternative. Poland had been carved up by Germany and the Soviet Union. Their families were living under Nazi occupation. And now, the ship that had just killed over 1,000 British sailors was right in front of them. Pławski opened radio channel. He wanted to make something very clear to the massive battleship. I am a Pole. Now Bismarck would know why the tiny destroyer charged straight at them. In the gray dawn of May 24, 1941, the Royal Navy suffered a blow so devastating it would echo through generations. The battlecruiser HMS Hood was an icon. For 2 decades, she'd been Britain's floating cathedral of naval supremacy, the largest, most beautiful warship in the world. Children had grown up with postcards of her elegant silhouette pinned to their bedroom walls. Sailors had served their entire careers dreaming of walking her decks. When she glided into foreign ports, crowds gathered just to glimpse her. And in 5 minutes, she was gone. The engagement with the German battleship Bismarck in the Denmark Strait lasted barely 12 minutes. Hood had fired only 2 salvos when an enemy shell plunged into her deck and found its way to her aft magazine. The explosion that followed defied comprehension. A pillar of flame that climbed over 1,000 feet into the Arctic sky, so massive that officers on the pursuing battleship Prince of Wales thought they were watching a volcanic eruption. When the smoke cleared, Hood had simply ceased to exist. Her bow rose vertically from the water, like a drowning man's last grasp for air, hung there for a terrible moment, and slipped beneath the waves. Of her 1,418 men, 3 survived. 3. When the news reached Britain, families who had waved goodbye to husbands at Portsmouth were heartbroken. Sweethearts who had tucked letters into their pockets that morning were left waiting for replies that would never come. In pubs and parlors, in factory break rooms and church halls, people wept openly. One account recalled, quote, "The mighty Hood was believed to be unsinkable. She was everybody's favorite." But grief in wartime Britain had a way of hardening into something else entirely. Prime Minister Winston Churchill's reaction was swift, cold, and absolute. He issued a 3-word directive that would become legend, quote, "Sink the Bismarck." The words carried the weight of 1,415 souls. The order galvanized the Royal Navy into a pursuit of almost biblical fury. Every available warship in the North Atlantic converged on a single target. The German behemoth now found herself hunted by an empire's worth of vengeance. For Britain, this was no longer merely strategic. 53,000 tons of armored power, armed with 8 15-inch guns, capable of ravaging the Atlantic convoys that kept the island nation alive. If she reached the open ocean, the consequences could be catastrophic. But beneath the strategic decision burned the need to answer blood with blood. The hunt was on. As soon as the order reached it, Admiral Sir John Tovey's home fleet, including the modern battleship HMS King George V and the veteran HMS Rodney, began a desperate race to catch Bismarck before she could escape. Bismarck, commanded by Admiral Gunther Lutyens and Captain Ernst Lindemann, was not unscathed. She'd been hit 3 times by HMS Prince of Wales during the battle, causing a fuel leak and some flooding. Those wounds forced Lutyens to abandon his raiding mission and head for port in German-occupied France for repairs, with the port of Brest as his goal. Lutyens also detached his consort, the heavy cruiser Prince Eugen, to continue commerce raiding alone. Now Bismarck was making a run for sanctuary, and the hunter-killer groups of the Royal Navy were in relentless pursuit. For more than 30 hours after the Denmark Strait battle, Bismarck slipped out of contact. Cruisers shadowing her in the aftermath had lost radar contact, and heavy weather set in, masking Bismarck's movements on the broad Atlantic. Tension mounted in British command centers as precious time ticked by. Finally, on May 26th, a Royal Air Force Catalina flying boat from Coastal Command spotted the German battleship low on the horizon. This sighting electrified the pursuing fleets. Through the radio static came the position report. Bismarck was 690 miles northwest of Brest, still within reach. Admiral Tovey adjusted course with his battleships, but it was clear they could only catch Bismarck with luck or by slowing her down. Thus, Force H from Gibraltar, led by the aircraft carrier HMS Ark Royal, was called in to make the critical strike. As evening fell on May 26th, Ark Royal squadrons of antiquated swordfish torpedo bombers braved gale winds and low clouds to attack Bismarck. In a stroke of fortune, one 18-inch torpedo struck Bismarck's stern and jammed her rudders at a 12-degree angle. The proud German battleship could now only steam in a slow curve, her steering crippled. The trap was closing. That night, with Bismarck damaged and zigzagging at reduced speed, destroyers of the Royal Navy's air destroyer flotilla moved in like wolves to harry their prey. These were small, nimble warships armed with guns and torpedoes, whose mission was to exploit Bismarck's reduced maneuverability and keep her under pressure until Tovey's heavy units arrived to finish the job. Among them were the tribal-class destroyers HMS Cossack, Maori, Sikh, and Zulu, led by Commander Philip Vlan. And also with them, cutting through the rough seas under cover of darkness, was a ship flying a red and white ensign, a Polish Navy destroyer on a collision course with history. ORP Piorun, meaning Thunderbolt in Polish, was the only non-British ship in the flotilla, a newcomer to the Allied fleet, but her crew was seasoned and determined. Piorun began life as HMS Nerissa, a British N-class destroyer laid down in 1939. Before she was even completed, the course of World War II forged a new identity for the ship. In May 1940, the Polish Navy, operating in exile alongside the Royal Navy after Poland's fall to Nazi invasion, suffered a painful loss when the destroyer ORP Grom was bombed and sunk during the Norwegian campaign. To honor their valiant Polish allies and replace Grom, the British Admiralty offered the next available new destroyer to Poland. Thus, HMS Nerissa was transferred in October 1940 and commissioned as ORP Piorun on November 5th. The name was fitting. Piorun would carry forward the thunderous spirit of her fallen predecessor. Most of Piorun's crew were Polish sailors who had survived Grom's sinking at Narvik. They were battle-hardened men who had lost their ship and homeland, now eager for revenge against the Germans. These veterans were joined by other Polish volunteers arriving from France and elsewhere, all determined to continue the fight under their national flag. Piorun's first commander was Commander Eugeniusz Pławski, a seasoned Polish naval officer who had served since World War I. By 1941, he was 46 years old, respected and unflinching. Under his leadership, Piorun quickly proved her mettle. In March 1941, during the heavy Luftwaffe bombing of Clydebank, Scotland, Piorun was stationed in port and leapt into action to defend against the air raids. Her gunners fought off German bombers in the Clydebank Blitz, at one point saving the brand new battleship HMS Duke of York and the destroyer Blankney from destruction by fires and bombs as they sat helpless in the shipyard. This fierce performance earned Piorun and her Polish crew admiration. It was clear they were as bold and aggressive as their ship's name implied. By late May 1941, Piorun was attached to the British 4th Destroyer Flotilla, escorting Atlantic convoys. On May 26th, Commander Vlan's flotilla received orders that would change Piorun's fate, detach from convoy duty, and make full speed to join the hunt for Bismarck. The timing was critical. Bismarck had been located that morning, and Vlan's destroyers were the closest forces that could reach her by nightfall. Though under orders to rendezvous with the home fleet's battleships, Vlan boldly ignored these instructions, correctly reasoning that his lighter ships were nearest the reported position, and that by night, Bismarck might slip away in this stormy weather, if not kept under observation. This decision would prove fateful. Vlan's 4 British destroyers and ORP Piorun steamed at flank speed through worsening seas, determined to intercept Bismarck by night. The conditions that evening were harrowing. A North Atlantic gale had blown up, bringing large swells, pitch-black skies, and driving rain squalls. The small destroyers struggled in the violent seas. On Piorun, the ship heeled wildly. Rolls exceeded 60 degrees, and waves slammed into her so hard that at times she was swung 120 to 150 degrees off course by the force of the water. Crewmen hung on for dear life as the destroyer's bow plunged into troughs and spray swept her decks. Despite these hardships, Piorun stayed in formation on the flotilla's left wing. These Polish sailors were used to adversity, and if Bismarck was out there, they intended to find her. Late that night, at 10:37 p.m. on May 26th, a cry rang out on Piorun's bridge, quote, "Ship 20 degrees off the starboard bow." Leading seaman Edward Delechki, Piorun's chief signalman on watch, had spotted a shape in the murk, immense and shadowy. It was the German battleship Bismarck, only about 16,000 yards away. The Polish destroyers had made contact with the Leviathan. Almost immediately, Bismarck confirmed her identity in brutal fashion. Upon Piorun sending a recognition signal, the German battleship opened fire on the destroyer with a secondary battery, spewing orange flame in the night. The 5.9-inch shells came whistling over the black water toward Piorun. Commander Pławski faced a split-second decision. His orders were to shadow and report Bismarck's position, not necessarily to engage in a gun duel. He instantly signaled Bismarck's location to Commander of Land by radio. But on Piorun's bridge, the officers and men were clamoring for a fight. Lieutenant Kazimierz Hess, Piorun's gunnery officer, and others urgently begged Pławski for permission to return fire. These were men with personal scores to settle. They had lost their country to Nazi Germany, and now their enemy's mightiest ship was in their sights. Pławski understood both his duty and the crew's resolve. He coolly gave the order to prepare for battle. At 10:50 a.m., he barked a historic command, quote, 3 salvos in honor of Poland. Even as Pławski gave the firing order, he added a defiant flourish. Before Piorun's guns roared, the destroyer flashed a signal lamp toward the enemy. Piorun sent the message, quote, Jestem Polakiem, jestem Polakiem. I am Polish. I am Polish. It was an extraordinarily bold announcement of identity, essentially telling Bismarck that the exiled Polish Navy was here for vengeance. With that, ORP Piorun charged into single combat with the giant. Alone and unsupported, Piorun steered directly toward Bismarck, which loomed out of the darkness about 8 miles away. Pławski knew full well that Bismarck's 15-inch guns, the same ones that destroyed Hood, could annihilate his destroyer with a single direct hit. Piorun, by contrast, was a mere 1,700-ton destroyer, armed with 6 4.7-inch guns, weapons that were pea shooters against a battleship's thick armor. On paper, it was foolish to engage. Yet in that dark night, none of that mattered to the Poles. They had an opportunity to strike Nazi Germany's pride, and they took it with fearless audacity. At 10:50 p.m., Piorun opened fire. Her first salvo of 4.7-inch shells crashed out toward Bismarck, quickly followed by a second and third salvo. Remarkably, Polish observers later reported that the second and third salvos appeared to straddle or hit Bismarck, though the visibility made confirmation impossible. Immediately, Bismarck responded with her heavy guns. With Piorun now well within range, Bismarck brought her main batteries to bear on the daring destroyer. In the pitch black, flashes of fire erupted as the German battleship let loose full salvos from her monstrous 15-inch guns, each shell weighing nearly a ton. For the next hour, an incredible point-blank duel played out, the tiny Polish destroyer zigzagging furiously, guns blazing, against the gigantic battleship, whose salvos sent towering waterspouts into the air around her. Piorun closed the range to about 7 kilometers at times, practically knife-fighting distance for a ship like Bismarck. The German gunners could hardly believe a destroyer was so intent on engaging. It forced them to keep switching their aim, and even use their heavy guns against this mosquito. Bismarck's secondary 5.9-inch batteries kept up a torrent of fire as well. Water geysers erupted all around Piorun as shells fell perilously close. After Bismarck's third main gun salvo, one shell landed only about 20 yards off Piorun's beam, a near miss whose blast wave shuddered through the Polish ship's hull. Commander Pławski realized just how closely they were courting destruction. After that near miss, he briefly pulled Piorun back to a slightly greater distance, but he did not disengage. Skillfully, Piorun weaved and twisted, laying smoke screens to throw off the German gunner's aim. Each time Bismarck's guns thundered, Piorun's bridge would brace for the hit that might end them. But each time, by sheer luck and expert helmsmanship, the salvos missed. Those on Bismarck's bridge must have felt both frustration and grudging admiration. This single destroyer simply would not back off, even under the fire of the world's most powerful battleship. British observers later called it, quote, a manifestation of Polish bravery that captured the public imagination. And practically speaking, Piorun's harassment was achieving a result. She kept Bismarck's attention fixed on her, spoiling any chance for the German crew to make repairs or hide in the bad weather. By engaging Bismarck, Piorun was also guiding the other destroyers in. Her radio reports and gun flashes effectively marked the enemy's position for the rest of Land's flotilla to converge. As midnight neared, the duel continued unabated. Crewmen later described how, with each salvo fired, they cursed the enemy and cheered their own gunners. clinging to anything solid as the ship bucked in the storm. The howling wind carried the smell of cordite and salt spray. Commander Pławski remained cool and focused. He tried to close the distance whenever possible, perhaps hoping for a miracle torpedo opportunity or simply to keep Bismarck fully occupied. None of Bismarck's shells found their mark on the zigzagging Polish destroyer. Similarly, Piorun's gunfire did little damage to Bismarck. The destroyer's 120mm shells would not penetrate Bismarck's armor at that range, unless by freak luck. German records don't indicate any hits from Piorun. But Piorun's gunners likely straddled the target a few times, and in that wild night, even Bismarck's crew could not be certain what was hitting them. The psychological effect of Piorun's brazen attack was itself significant. By about 11:30 p.m., the other destroyers of the flotilla, Maori, Cossack, Sikh, Zulu, had closed in, homing toward the blaze of heavy guns. Piorun's mad skirmish had allowed them to, quote, concentrate near Bismarck, despite the atrocious visibility. Commander Vlan now ordered a coordinated torpedo attack to finish the job his small ships had started. The signal came through for all destroyers to attack Bismarck from different directions in a divergent or subdivision tactic, essentially an outflanking maneuver. However, an amusing twist emerged. This particular RN torpedo tactic was not clearly understood by the Polish crew or even the Royal Navy liaison officer aboard Piorun. Pławski and the British navigating officer, Lieutenant E.F. Hayman, puzzled over the phrasing divergent or by subdivisions, which wasn't in Pławski's handbook. Unable to decipher it, Pławski improvised. He tried to follow the lead of HMS Maori, the division leader for signals. But Maori, perhaps busy dodging salvos herself, did not signal any specific instruction to Piorun. Rather than act blindly, Pławski made a prudent decision. Piorun would hold back and attack last, so as not to interfere with the other destroyers' maneuvers. In the meantime, he would continue doing what he did best, harassing Bismarck and keeping her guns trained on him as much as possible. Around 11:45 p.m., as Piorun tenaciously kept snapping at Bismarck's heels, the German battleship suddenly altered course. Perhaps Bismarck's captain, Lindemann, had had enough of this pesky destroyer and sought to shake her off. Whatever the case, Piorun briefly lost visual contact. Then, at 11:50 p.m., Bismarck fired a final thunderous salvo in Piorun's direction, one last titanic spout of water, leaping up frighteningly close off Piorun's side. But again, there was no hit. Moments later, Bismarck vanished into the rainy darkness. At midnight, Pławski caught a glimpse of a shape and even pursued it, but it turned out to be a mirage of one of the other British destroyers. By now, heavy sheets of rain were pouring down, reducing visibility to a few hundred meters. Pławski finally had to concede that he had lost Bismarck in the storm. What Piorun did not immediately know was that the other destroyers had managed to re-establish contact with Bismarck during the night. They launched several torpedo attacks in the early hours of May 27th, darting in and out. No torpedo hits were scored, but Bismarck was forced to evade and keep maneuvering. Importantly, these nocturnal assaults further denied Bismarck any chance to perform repairs or stay hidden. All through the night, flares, star shells, and gunfire sporadically lit up the horizon as the desperate duel continued between the Kriegsmarine's giant and the pack of British destroyers. Piorun, however, after his solitary duel, was running extremely low on fuel. By around 5 a.m. on May 27th, with dawn about to break, Commander Vlan ordered Piorun to detach and head back to base, lest she run dry far from port. Pławski, ever tenacious, requested permission to stay a little longer. He quickly consulted Piorun's chief engineer, Lieutenant Commander Julian Wielogorski, and calculated they could afford a couple more hours searching at low speed. So despite having only a meager fuel reserve, Piorun continued to sweep the area until 7 a.m., refusing to quit the fight until he knew others had found the enemy. Only once the first light of dawn confirmed the presence of larger British ships closing in on Bismarck did Pławski finally break off. Piorun turned eastward for England with the grim satisfaction that they had done their duty to the fullest. Daybreak on May 27, 1941, found Bismarck alone, crippled and doomed. Thanks to the valiant night actions, Piorun's chief among them, Bismarck had been unable to escape or remain unseen. As the gray morning light spread, the silhouette of the German battleship was spotted by British heavy units. The Royal Navy's home fleet battleships, HMS King George V and HMS Rodney, along with cruisers HMS Norfolk and HMS Dorsetshire, engaged Bismarck in a first artillery barrage. The once mighty German ship, now unable to steer and making only 7 knots, fought back bravely but stood no chance. For over an hour, the British battleships pounded Bismarck to pieces at close range, firing hundreds of heavy shells that smashed her guns, gutted her interior, and left her a burning wreck. By 10:35 a.m., Bismarck was awash with flames. Her crew began to abandon ship. Dorsetshire closed in and launched torpedoes, and Bismarck, whether finished off by those torpedoes or scuttled from within by her remaining crew, finally slipped beneath the waves at 10:40 a.m. on May 27, 1941. The Royal Navy had had its revenge. The pride of the Kriegsmarine was sunk just 3 days after the loss of Hood. Out of a crew of over 2,200 on Bismarck, only around 110 survivors were rescued from the oily, frigid Atlantic waters. The sinking of Bismarck had immense military and propaganda significance. The German Navy suffered a huge blow to its reputation. The loss of its most powerful battleship, so early in its career, was a prestige disaster for Hitler's regime. Strategically, it proved that even the largest warships could not operate alone without air cover or support. After this, the Germans shifted their strategy even more toward U-boat wolf packs as Admiral Dönitz doubled down on submarine warfare to strangle Britain. As Bismarck plunged into the Atlantic, ORP Piorun steamed back toward Britain, riding the swells of the same storm that had challenged her all night. During the return voyage, Piorun even had to fend off a final menace. German aircraft from the Luftwaffe made a last attempt to strike, trying to aid Bismarck or avenge her by attacking pursuing ships. Piorun's anti-aircraft crew went into action and drove off the marauding aircraft, coming through unscathed. After that, the exhausted ship pressed on for the English coast. On the morning of May 28, 1941, ORP Piorun limped into Devonport Harbor. She arrived at 9:40 a.m., almost exactly 1 week after she had left, on what was supposed to be a routine convoy escort. The welcome that Piorun and her crew received in Britain was triumphant. As soon as the ship docked, messages of praise began pouring in. Admiral Sir John Tubby, commander of the Home Fleet, sent his congratulations, as did Admiral Sir Percy Noble of Western Approaches Command and Piorun's own flotilla leader, Commander Vlan. Perhaps most meaningful were the notes from the Polish High Command in exile. General Władysław Sikorski, the Polish commander-in-chief, and even Ignacy Paderewski, the elderly statesman and head of the Polish National Council, both sent laudatory telegrams. The story of how a lone Polish destroyer had dueled Bismarck captured the public imagination. British newspapers printed dramatic accounts of Piorun's exploit, heralding the bravery of the Polish Navy. Indeed, the engagement quickly acquired legendary status. The Daily Sketch and the Times ran pieces extolling the courage of Pławski and his crew. And in Nazi-occupied Poland, the story was whispered in secret as a morale-boosting anecdote of Polish defiance. In recognition of their valor, formal honors followed. A few months later, on the recommendation of the Royal Navy, King George V decorated Commander Pławski and Lieutenant Hess with the Distinguished Service Cross for their leadership in the Bismarck action. 2 enlisted men who'd been pivotal, Bosun Bolesław Laza and signalman Edward Daleczki, the lookout who'd first sighted Bismarck, received the Distinguished Service Medal. The Polish government in exile also awarded numerous crosses of valor to Piorun's crew, including Pławski and Hess, in recognition of their bravery in battle. Interestingly, there was one sour footnote amid the accolades. The Polish Naval High Command initially questioned why Pławski had not launched torpedoes at Bismarck during the battle. An inquiry was convened, perhaps because some felt that having engaged so boldly, Piorun might have tried a torpedo attack as well. Pławski explained the circumstances, the confusion over the British attack signals, and his decision not to interfere with the other destroyers' torpedo runs. Plus Piorun's loss of contact at the critical moment. The Board of Inquiry found no fault in Pławski's actions, concluding he had exercised sound judgment in a chaotic situation. Indeed, considering Piorun's fuel state and the weather, attempting a lone torpedo run might have been a futile sacrifice. In the end, Pławski's decision to prioritize maintaining contact was vindicated. ORP Piorun sailed on through the war, covering herself with further distinction in Arctic convoys and the Mediterranean theater. But it was her hour against Bismarck that would forever define her legacy. So respected was Piorun after the Bismarck episode that when the 4th Destroyer Flotilla repainted their funnel markings later in 1941, They added a red and white Polish checkerboard emblem on each destroyer's funnel as a tribute to the Polish ship. Commander Vland himself sent Pławski a personal message, quote, "You were the first ship to sight the enemy. I regret that the lack of fuel prevented you from watching his sinking. I hope you will be with me also in the next action." When the steel had cooled and the Bismarck had vanished into the deep, the memory of that night remained etched in the spray of the North Atlantic. It was the moment a stateless crew, having lost their homes and their flags, found their voice in the roar of their own guns. For 1 hour, the odds didn't matter, and the world's most feared ship was forced to reckon with the one thing no broadside could sink, the defiance of men who had nothing left to lose but their lives.